And I think it is important to start with that, and I'm delighted to be with you. It's part of our mandate as the Central Bank of Kenya to be advisor to government. So I stand before you because you've called me to you. You didn't summon me. You just called me. And it's my responsibility to answer that call. And I want to assure you that as often as you call me, I'll show up. And I'll explain things, and I think Bwana Speaker can clarify, can actually attest that in his previous responsibility, when they called me, I was ready to talk about whatever they wanted. So we are there. So thank you very much. Now, I'll go rather quickly over some things, but I think we can open the discussion at the end of it. Although you can stop me if there's a particular burning question that comes to you about the economy. So the first point to make is Kenya is not a project. Okay, Kenya is not a project. Those of us that think of Kenya as a project, I think, have a different narrative. The way we see it is Kenya is that ship there, you know. So it is we are on a journey, we are on a voyage. So really, MV Kenya is what we are talking about. And as it sails, there are certain things it wants to accomplish, the distance. So you have the dashboard. And from what you've been hearing and telling people during your campaigns, and et cetera, and also as citizens, economic growth is an important thing. You want to see the country growing. And we as economists just love to talk about economic growth. And we say it's 8%, it's 5%, it's this. But it's not the only thing that matters. You also have been talking about cost of living. That's another element in your dashboard. And also other things about health, education. For instance, I think a lot of you, even when you talk about the cost of living, how does it impact you? And I can assure you that it impacts you a lot because, let's say, somebody has a bill at a hospital and they cannot afford it. And then they come to you, etc. So the issue of health, the health outcomes and education outcomes are extremely important. And then infrastructure. So you have infrastructure, roads. We are talking about the various, even the SGR roads, but roads, not just new roads, even, you know, are the roads, are there potholes in the roads? Are they tarmacked? I think we have a whole set of issues. By the way, I see a lot of you writing notes, which is good. But I think I would also tell you that you will get the slides. We'll make sure that they come to you circulated appropriately. So, but anyway, it's good to write notes on this. But there are some things that hold us back. So this thing is sailing. But what holds us back? What draws us back? I think there are some things that, and the first, I think, is corruption. Corruption is a net loss to the economy. Yeah? So if you have, corruption will benefit one person, but it is a huge loss to the entire economy. So that holds us back. It's an anchor. I think we know that. There's a big net loss, which is pending bills as well. When you have pending bills, you know what happens. However they are created, however they are generated, it ends up, you know, let's say the contractor, next time he'll price, instead of pricing it at 100, he'll price it at 120 because he expects that he won't get it on time, etc. And so there's a big problem there, and it also allows you, it's an opening for corruption, etc. So that's another issue. High inflation, another big problem, which holds us back. And then some of the things that may lead to weak institutions. So think of KRA or central bank or even the police when they end up becoming poor, meaning, or the judiciary. So they weaken, they cannot deliver on their mandate for whatever reason. And I think Kenya has an entire history of strengthening institutions and then breaking them, and then strengthening them. You know, so we need to be sure that we protect the institutions through and through. I also wanted to talk about the poor environment that may be their environment in terms of the environment out there, but also other things like business climate, etc. So all those things hold the MV Kenya back from sailing. Now, the sails that are there in this boat, they are actually fiscal policy. There are three in particular: fiscal policy or fiscal, the outcomes or the fiscal policy or implementation of fiscal policy, financial policies, which is more like ours. So fiscal is all about the budget, etc. We mentioned it. Financial is more about banking and so forth. If it is working well, if interest rates are working well, savings will happen. People are sure of their money in banks, etc. And also on the external side. So think of exports, imports, think of foreign currency, think of all those things. Those are the three sails in the economy. And if they are well trimmed, the boat will sail very quickly, despite there being, the wind not being strong, etc. But then there's another element there known as debt. And you can see it, it's the keel in the boat. The keel makes sure that the boat doesn't topple over, right? So if the wind blows it in a particular way, the keel makes sure that the boat stabilizes. But if the keel is too big, it can actually capsize the boat. And that's what happens when debt becomes balloons beyond compare. Then it becomes a problem that has to be dealt with. So the keel cannot just be randomly anything. So we have to manage debt so that it helps us instead of hindering us. So colleagues, what I'll do is I'll talk about MV Kenya, and some of these issues I'm going to touch on them, and later on, if you want to have more specific questions, I can obviously deal with them. The slide that I want to show next is to show you where we are, where we were in July. This one, every 2 months, we do a survey of market perceptions, right? Now, you have a sense or a pulse of the economy in your jurisdiction, in your constituency, in your county, etc. We, every 2 months, take the temperature, the perception of people around the businesses, really, around the country. And we ask them, what is their sense of optimism in Kenya's economic prospects? And we did this in July, just before the elections, right? And we had also done it in 2017, just before the elections. And what we found very interesting is in 2017, so it's banks and non-banks, but the results are very similar. In 2017, you remember the previous contentious elections, but it was even before that. Only about 26% of banks, and indeed only 35% of non-banks were were optimistic about the economy. So 25 or 35%. And indeed, in July of this year, it was just the reverse. It was about 80% of banks and around 73% of non-banks. So we are making the point that actually, even as we are coming to the elections, there was a lot of optimism in the country. And this is, in a sense, let's say, the break between politics and economics. So people wanted to just go, do their economic things, etc. Even as you were doing the campaigns, etc. People are focused on their things. They're listening to you, but they want to go ahead with the economy. This, to me, is interesting. We are doing another survey now, and in about a week or so, or 10 days, I'll tell you what the outcome is of the survey now after the elections. So, a few issues. The economy, how strong is it growing? And the slide on the board now gives you details about the growth. Remember, one of the outcomes we talked about is economic growth. GDP growth, as we call it. It's true, I've made the point before, and I continue to make the point that you cannot eat GDP. You cannot eat GDP. So even as we as economists talk about GDP, we need to temper that, because it's not GDP that people are interested in. The issue is these incomes that are measured here, are they helping people? That is the big question. But it's a way of looking at the economy in totality. And there you can see last year, even though last year was hard, that's 2021, or you can even begin in 2020. 2020 was the first COVID year. We grew, actually in 2020, we just were flat, 0.3%, decline of 0.3%, so flattish. And then in 2021, we rebounded at 7.4. And in the first quarter of this year, it grew at 6.8. And we are expecting that this year we are going, and those are the numbers at the bottom, will grow at 5.4%. 5.4%, frankly, is a strong growth relative to other countries. It may not be the strongest that Kenya has delivered, but in the circumstances of the economic situation around the world, that is a very strong level of growth. I want to show you the next slide, which is just showing you a long-term trend of growth, and that is the dashed line. So it goes from 2010 to 2021. So 2021 is the 7.5 we mentioned. But you can see that growth rate has generally been around 5%. So around 5%, that's what it is averaged. That chart also shows you the contributions of growth, which are the sectors that are driving growth. And I think the one that really sticks out is the reddish one, the brown one, and that is services. So services really is, we've moved from agriculture, and now agriculture is the bluish one. You can see the services is the one that is dominating. So when we talk about ICT, when we talk about hotels and accommodation, trade, retail, etc., and all the other services, education, health, that is really now what Kenya is becoming. So we've moved away from sort of the one sector, agriculture. It's still important, but we're just saying that it is interesting to see where the growth is coming from. Let's move on to the next. I mentioned in passing that the world is a rather harsh place today, very bad place. Meaning world economy, there are a lot of problems in the world economy. The first of this is that the world economy is likely to, the growth rate is falling, meaning it's slowing down. There's even talks about recessions, a recession in the advanced economies. And this shows you, this was done by the IMF. It's a standard table that most economists are familiar with, the World Economic Outlook. And you can see world growth, that's the blue column in July. July numbers was projected at 3.2. Actually, in about 2 weeks, they are going to issue a new projection, and we expect that 3.2 will be scaled down even more. The world is actually, the world economy, the global economy is worsening dramatically. You've heard about inflation at critical levels, but even growth is shrinking in these places. I don't want to talk too much about this slide, but I just wanted to make the point that the global growth is expected to be weaker. And therefore, we in Kenya, we are connected to the rest of the world. We need to be appreciative of that and take the right measures. I want to talk about inflation in Kenya. One of the items that we mentioned a moment ago about the cost of living. And the dashed line is the number, the numbers that are announced and are circulated at the end of every month. So the last number was 8.5%, and that was in August. And we expect that this going forward, it will remain elevated around 8.5, maybe even higher, particularly given that there has been changes in the price of oil, petroleum, and that will push inflation higher. But that is well within sort of the scope of the things that we are doing. So we are not letting this go by its own. We need to be careful of the implication more generally, as you put it, on the cost of living. To be clear, the things that have been pushing up inflation in Kenya, first and foremost, is food inflation. Now that is your various products, including the non-vegetables, but obviously a lot of vegetables in there, unga, sugar, etc. And then, of course, fuel. So next slide is interesting because we just talked a moment ago about 8.5. That's where we are in Kenya. What about the US? Where are they? And the US, if you look, that's the red line, they're actually at 8.3. So inflation in the US is exactly like us. In effect, and I'm going to use this line, that used to be us. So in the US, it's 8.3. In the UK, it's 9.9, and it's going to break 10. So it will be in the double digits. And in the US also, it may end up in the double digits. Eurozone already at 9.1. The point is, these numbers are, let's just say, anathema to the advanced economies, because they used to have inflation at 2%. They are trying to get it to 2%. Now they are way above us. So that's what I'm saying. That used to be us. When we are struggling with high levels of inflation, and they are on the low levels, and us and saying, look at the less developed countries, inflation is high there, etc. I think we can teach them a lesson or two, but let's keep it to ourselves for now. Yeah. So the bottom line here is that inflation has become endemic in the advanced economies. And we know why. First and foremost is the price of oil in those countries. Secondly is first was the problems with the supply chains that were there, meaning they were unable to deliver products as needed in the quantities, even timber and things like that. Prices were more than doubled, etc. As a matter of fact, the next slide shows you some interesting products in the global market. So, for instance, palm oil, that is the yellow one. Palm oil goes into your edible oil, it goes into the soap, it goes into things like that. Yeah, a lot of the household things. And if you remember, there was a time some palm oil importers or makers of edible oils were complaining about foreign exchange shortage, etc. Actually, what they didn't tell you is their problem was not foreign exchange foreign exchange availability. What it was is actually the price had really shot up in the global markets, and Malaysia had banned the exports because they wanted to protect themselves, right? So we had problems importing those things. But anyway, now the price has come down, and therefore you'd expect that the prices of those products or more, or whatever it is, the Blue Band, all those other products that are made, or soap that are made from this sort of oil will come down. I don't want to talk about too many of the others, but you can look at them. The point to make is that since June, the global prices of a lot of the things that we import has begun to come down. And it will continue, we hope. And so by December, we'll have much better landed prices. As a matter of fact, the next slide is about oil. This is Marban oil, which is our benchmark oil. And you can see it had gone as far as $130 a barrel. That was in March. And now it has come down to about $93 a barrel. The expectation is that this will come down even more, to the point where we won't have to have the subsidies. You understand? So it's true, we eliminated the fuel subsidies on the I guess, the super, etc., right? but on also the other products, including diesel, etc. So you have the price coming down, and therefore the gap is narrowing. So the pressure on the consumer and indeed on the government becomes less and less. But anyway, that's the expectation, but let's wait and see. Now we come to another set of items that is important for you, fiscal. I remember I talked about in that first chart, that first picture, and I really think that that picture has a lot. And I'll be, in our conversations in the future, I'll keep bringing up that picture. I talked about fiscal policies or the fiscal accounts, etc. And the idea that is one of the sails that are catching whatever is there, the favorable winds, and pulling MV Kenya forward, or for that matter, any other country. So let's look at what is the overall fiscal performance through time. And I think the first place, we call it the fiscal balance, right? The deficit, as it were. And that is the red line. Generally, when we measure the deficit, we measure it against GDP. So it's not enough to say it is so many Kenya shillings, because the economy is growing. So you measure it, you scale it against GDP. And so, for instance, in 2020, 2021, which is 2 fiscal years ago, it was 8.4. So 8.4% of GDP. That was the deficit, and that's what we covered. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with this, because most of you are in I see people who are in the budget committee before, and other committees. I also see, anyway, so I think you're familiar with this sort of scaling. But I think it is important what is important here? The blue is revenue and grants, also as a share of GDP. And then the gold is the expenditures. And you can see there's a sort of an increase, there's a wedge between them, right? And that is the deficit. So actually expenditures have risen. It's true, in later years, revenues have fallen as a share of GDP. That is the crux of the problem. Now, it didn't happen yesterday. You can see there was an increase. When I mean yesterday, I mean over the last, let's say, months or last year. You can see it had gone even in 2016, 2017, it was as high as 9.6%. And it came down, and so this indeed shows, if there was one chart that you want to say is the scorecard of all of us as a country in terms of fiscal performance, this is it. And one can say that things have tightened, meaning things have worsened in later years, but I think one has to understand why. And I think one of the issues towards the end is COVID. COVID required us, when we were dealing with COVID, it required us to spend a lot more, even as revenues were falling. Remember, the economy shut down in many ways, right? Remember, we didn't even have services. I told you services is now the leading sector. All those were shut. So in effect, we were in a sort of a quote-unquote survival mode. And I think the point here is that that's why the deficit increased. But now we have to take it back to where it should be. The next chart shows us what that means. So just to tell you more or less what this, so the red is the actuals. So remember I said that in 2020, fiscal year 2021, the deficit was 8.4. So that's the middle 8.4. And then the next year, which is the last fiscal year, the tentative number is 6.1. 6.1 is a significant improvement. However, there's a little catch here. This does not include the pending bills that may have been accumulated and not paid. So this number may need to be adjusted by that amount to correctly reflect the actual, let's say, commitment of resources that government took. But the direction is clear. The path that had been chosen, or that has been chosen by government over time, medium term, is one that is the green one, is one that would bring us back down to stability less than, in the order of 3%. 3% in 5 years. 3% of GDP, which is a sustainable place to be. So this, to me, is where you want to go. The issue is, can we deliver on it? And if we can deliver on this fiscal plan, consolidation plan, I think you would have achieved one of the, let's say, you'd be one of the largest successes for our country into the future, and indeed through time. Now, if we had looked a little more at the graphs that I had shown before, don't go back, but it's interesting to see that there has been moments in the past that actually we had strengthened our fiscal performance. So it is not impossible to strengthen our fiscal performance. Then we talk about debt. This is another topic that you're familiar with. Debt. The question is, where is our debt? Meaning, is it, how painful is it? You all know, and you've been told, as somebody was telling me today, that your own, let's say, in your own constituencies, you asked about debt. And people on the radio will ask about this. Here is a long series about the evolution of Kenya's public debt. Again, it's scaled against GDP. And you can see there was a time it was at 64%. That was in 2000, 2002, 2003. And then it came down to 38% in 2007, 2008. And now it's gone back up to 69%.